right, ladies and gents, welcome back to the show. Today I have Katie Allen with me, and we were just talking before I hit record. We were both in a mastery program together, not at the same time. We went through it at different times, but that community in and of itself is what brought us together. And we were able to meet each other in person in Detroit. Oh, it's been a couple, 2-3 weeks ago now, probably a month or so when you guys are listening to this. And it's just so cool. Like, she just came up to me and I'm like, hey, and it just felt like, we've kind of known each other forever, even though we've only had a handful of conversations. And just knowing that, like, we can meet and embrace one another and kind of that, like, not awkward, no judgment zone. So the first time me and Katie talked was actually when she was launching her podcast, Just Realized. And then, her Instagram handle is Katie Just Realized, but you guys can go listen to her podcast on iTunes. But we had a conversation about creating a podcast, and now here she is. She's on mine, and I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about her story and where she started and where she's at now. So welcome, Katie.
Thanks, Sasha. I'm super excited to be here. So yeah, it's a funny story. So I joined, you had probably been graduated for like a year by the time I joined the program.
Yep.
And you kept coming up in some of the replay calls I was watching. And then I had an accountability call one morning and someone said, well, Sasha Davis started a podcast. You should reach out to her. So I just searched you or stalked you on social media, sent you a message. And I was like, I know you don't know me, but please, can I just have 30 minutes of your time to pick your brain? And I can still remember that morning when I was sitting in my office calling you and I was scared shitless. I was like, I don't even know what to ask her. I don't even know what the fuck I'm doing. All I know is I want to start a podcast and I'm going to do it. And somebody's going to tell me what to do. So thank you.
No, I love it. And it's so funny that you asked me, because sometimes I feel like I should do a podcast on how to start a podcast, because I've had kind of like what we were saying earlier. I've had a bunch of people come to me, just like you've had a bunch of people come to you. And there's really no one size fits all from beginning to end on how to start a podcast. There's bits and pieces out there. I think it took me weeks to find all of the YouTube videos and all the tutorials on like how to do it. And I think we broke it down into less than an hour,
Yeah. I think it was like 30 minutes. I completely agree. It's like, I don't feel like there's a lot of information out there, but then at the same time, once you start doing it, you're like, oh, this really isn't that hard. Like, it's way more in your head, which is like most things in life anyway. But I was like, damn it, all you need is a computer and I don't even know if you need a microphone. Just hit record.
Exactly. I love it. So, and then people, when you guys go listen to her podcast, she'll share a whole lot about her story. But today I want to get into the nitty gritty, like the beginning of things. So let's start there.
All right. So I would say that this kind of like self-development, self-awareness journey really started for me about 6 or 7 years ago. We had just had our second kid. My husband and I were college sweethearts. So we're actually 39 now. So we've been together for 20 years.
Holy smokes. That's over half the life.
I know. At this point, I've been with him more than I haven't been with him. I'm like, who am I?
That's a cool milestone, though. That's awesome.
Yep. So in May, it will be 20 years. It's wild. So we got married when we were 25. We had our first kid at 28. Fast forward, we have our daughter. And our daughter had some developmental issues at first. Like, her whole pregnancy was like, she just was like a slow grower, for lack of a better word. And the whole thing was a little stressful. That we have her, and it was kind of like the icing on the cake for us and like our marriage and just like life. And we're, in our early 30s. So you're just kind of like at this pivotal point in life is kind of how I felt about it. And up until that point, everything I did was, in hindsight, I can say this was from an ego-driven place. And I had never really been introduced to self-awareness or self-development. And we were kind of talking about this when I interviewed you on my podcast. Is I thought I was this confident person and I thought I knew like everything I needed to know, but it was really outwardly, right? Not inside. I didn't know all this stuff. So we just hit this shitty point in our marriage, like rock bottom, right? The resentment levels for both of us were like through the roof. There's a point like he actually isn't even living in the house at this point. And this is for a couple of weeks. He's at his mom's house. I'm sitting in the house with two kids. One It's a baby. Well, she's a little bit older than a baby at this point, probably almost 1. And I'm like, I have a kid that's never going to walk. Now my marriage is falling apart. I did everything everyone told me to do. I checked all the fucking boxes. Go to college, get married, have kids, get a job, make money. What the fuck is happening? So that was kind of that pivotal moment for me of who am I? Like, how did I get here? So we had just bought a new house, and I have this walk-in closet of mine, and that's kind of becoming the place where I go to hide, but to lay on the floor and just be completely depressed. And I just don't know who I am anymore. And I'm like, how do I save my marriage? How do I do all these things? And I'm just laying there, and it just became like this dark hole for me where I was hiding. And we did decide that we wanted to say, obviously we're still together, that we wanted to save the marriage, but that took so much inner working. And that's when I realized that none of the shit that I was dealing with was really about him. Even though I thought it wasn't. And that is kind of where my self-development journey began, but it was so fucking slow. And like I said, that was like 6 years ago. And just last year had I really, really dug in into really investing in myself. So over that 6-year period, I had dug in deep and had just focused on our marriage and getting our marriage back on track. And I was learning things along the way. And I had to admit some things about myself that weren't easy to admit, right? Like, oh, maybe I do that. Maybe I am a bitch sometimes. Maybe it's not always you. And then I kind of started to dive into this self-development journey, and I started listening to podcasts. And at first when I was listening to podcasts, I was like, it was just pure entertainment. And then I stumbled across the Mom is in Control podcast, and I listened to it for almost a year before I'd ever actually reached out to Heather. And I was like, damn, I've always wanted to start a podcast, but I just didn't know how. And one day I was just laying in my closet on one of my depressed mornings where I was like, this literally just cannot be all my life. I mean, like, my marriage is fine now. You know, we've fixed things. The kids are healthy. I'm healthy. Like, why do I still feel so dead inside? Yes. And that's when I kind of had this aha moment that I don't do anything for myself. And I kind of had this moment of, I don't even know who I am. And my husband kept telling me over the years of us, like, fixing everything and learning how to communicate. And I always joke, like, to learn how to fight and figuring this out. And he said, you need a hobby. And at one point I even said to him, well, you guys are my hobby. And I was like, damn. In that moment, I didn't realize how powerful that statement was, or disempowering, really. But in hindsight, once that day I laid in my closet and I was really starting to become more self-aware just through listening to listening to other podcasts, I was like, I really don't know who I am. And I have never given myself the time or the space to even think about who I am. And unfortunately, I just feel like so many women find themselves in this space because we don't know how to give ourselves permission to be who we want to be. Like, we feel like we have to cater to everybody. And I was kind of telling you this earlier, is I've always had this big, bold personality. So I always thought I was super powerful. And I thought I was this powerful woman, and I was going to change the world, and I'm going to climb the corporate ladder, and I'm going to make so much change there. And then I started hitting these points, and I'm like, why am I so dead inside if I'm so powerful? But really what I learned is I was actually giving my power away every fucking opportunity someone would give me to give it away. I was like, here you go. You can have it, because I don't know who I am. So that's a little bit about me.
So I have a question. Do you feel like you lost yourself after having children, or do you think that this started prior to having children? Because me, I felt like I had all my shit together, and then I had kids, and it was like, whoa, okay, just kidding.
Absolutely. So, and this is one of the things why I wanted to start a podcast, was to talk about all those things, because when I had my son, he's 11 now. So when I had my son, I particularly remember this one night sitting in the hallway, in our first house, trying to breastfeed, just trying. Like, it's not even actually happening. Like, I'm trying to breastfeed. He's probably like 3 weeks old. My husband is sleeping and it's the middle of the night and it's so dark and it's so quiet. And I felt so isolated and so alone. And I was like, how in the fuck do people have kids? Who keeps doing this? And I remember
I love that. I say that all the time. I'm like, who said that this has to be this way? Like, who said this?
Oh, I was so mad. I was so frustrated. And I was so frustrated for one, like just like your hormones. And I mean, 3 weeks, you're still like going through the motions real hard. I'm mad at my husband because he's peacefully sleeping. But then I'm like, well, if I'm breastfeeding, he can't really help anyway. So what the fuck's the point? And then I had so much trouble breastfeeding, but I felt so much pressure to breastfeed from society, people, friends, family, whatever. And I'm like sitting up in the middle of the night and I'm like, but I'm the only one fucking sitting here trying to breastfeed in the middle of the night and everyone's telling me what I should do and I'm miserable. And it's funny. I remember thinking about my sister and my best friend who had already had kids before me. Hopefully they don't listen to this because I was very mad at them. I mean, they know this because I told them, but I remember
you.
I remember calling my sister and I was like, what in the absolute fuck? Your baby's only 18 months older than mine. You did not tell me that having a kid was like this. And she's like, well, what the hell was I supposed to tell you? That it sucks? She was like, you're supposed to just love your kids. You're supposed to just jump in. It's supposed to just be easy, but it's not. And because we don't talk about it, we don't have tools to even begin to know how to deal with it. And no one tells you anything. And it's so isolating. So yes, absolutely. To answer your question, that's when I realized that I didn't know anything. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted. I had never felt so alone in my life. And, you know, I used the word resentment earlier when I was talking, and I would say like, that's kind of when that started for me because I've resented my husband because I felt like he didn't know what to do. But of course he didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. No one knows what to do because no one talks about it. There's like, here, have a baby, take it home. It'll be fine.
Absolutely.
And it's not.
No, and this goes back to what we were saying before about, you know, everything now it seems to be like, oh, this is the real life. This is me unfiltered. And it's like, even the things that we see online that say they're unfiltered or this is real life, like a lot of that is even bullshit. Like they're censoring what they're saying to appeal to a specific audience. So is that really telling you how it is? Or is that just telling you how we think you should hear it? And so that's where I think the power of story comes. And, you know, your experience with parenting is going to be very different than my experience with parenting, but we can learn from one another by saying, okay, well, this worked for her and this part really sucked, you know, and just giving ourselves grace and knowing that like it's not perfect, it's not butterflies and rainbows all the time. And you know, while you love your children, you don't necessarily have to like your children every single day either. Like moms need a break too. It's just like anything. We can burn out. If you run a marathon every single day, you're probably going to get burnout. You know, if you don't ever sleep, you're going to get burnout. Like you can get burnout on parenting too. And knowing that like it's okay to ask for help and it takes a village and like it's fucking rough. Like breastfeeding, I mean, that can be a whole nother podcast in and of itself, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But nobody does tell you that, okay, your nipples are going to be cracked and bleeding and you're going to pump bottles of blood to try to get through these like clots. Like nobody tells you that. And you're just like, oh my God, am I dying? Is my baby dying? Is what's happening? You know, all these thoughts. And everybody just says, oh, it's normal, but they don't have an experience for you to relate it to, you know? So I love that you're just kind of being raw and real and just totally yourself like, hey, yeah, it totally sucks. So now we know it sucks. You've lost yourself. Nobody's told you anything. What's your next step?
So, like I said, so our marriage hits rock bottom. We actually go to therapy, and that was the beginning of like learning about yourself. And I haven't actually talked about this on the podcast, but I've talked about other people is, you know, she handed us like the love languages book or told us to go take the test. And it was like, first, you guys need to know, how do you want to receive love? And I was like, what the fuck does that even mean? But I did it and we both did it. And then you realize that what you want out of your partner is how you want to be loved back. And that was such a eye-opening, that for me, that was the very first time I had did anything around like self-awareness. And I was like, oh, no wonder, because I want him to help me do everything, because that's, acts of service, which is just one of the 5, is how I want to be loved. So that's what I do for him, but that's not what makes him feel loved.
What's
So this
his?
Physical touch.
So is mine. I find that a lot of men are physical touch, and mine is quality time, and then my second is acts of service. So I love that.
Yeah. And I think, for me, it feels very like typical, right? So like women always feel busy, busy, busy. So you want someone to help you. And then like there's comedy specials, and like we joke about it with our friends. It's like, if you come home from work and your husband's doing the dishes, you're like, yes, yes.
You're getting laid tonight.
Yeah. Like if you want to turn your wife on, wash the fucking dishes.
Absolutely. Do a couple loads of laundry. Like nothing turns somebody on. Then for me, like wanting to spend one-on-one time with me and doing things for me. Like,
yes. Yes. Like touch my brain first, and then you can touch my body.
Absolutely.
But I know that's funny, but it was really the first time that anyone had ever made me like think about how your brain works and those things. And like I said, it was a really, really long journey, but it kind of started with just being grateful, right? I feel like that's a simple one that you have easy access to. Oh, super hard. But it's one that maybe you've heard before, right? Because I'm learning so much stuff about just like the way your brain works and how it's designed to keep you safe and all these different things that like at that point weren't even on my radar. So like, okay, I've heard of being grateful. I've heard of being positive. Maybe I should try it out.
Well, what did that look like for you? How did you show up as a more positive and more grateful individual?
Well, this is going to sound really stupid, but I actually went to Home Goods one day and I found a little like a little thing you hang on your wall, like little wall decor art. And I hung it in my bathroom, in my master bath. And it said, "Today, have a grateful heart," or something like that. And I literally would read it every single morning. And I would just kind of sit there and just kind of have a few moments to myself, because we were still really kind of just like going through it. And like I said, our daughter was still really young at this time. So and now looking back, it was almost meditative. I just didn't know that that's what meditation can mean, so many different things to so many different people. And that's one thing I really try to pump on my podcast is like, when you say things like that, like you were saying earlier, like people always envision this hippie, super zen person sitting somewhere, and really meditation can just be 5 minutes to yourself.
In
like,
the bathroom. Locked
yes,
in the bathroom. Like,
yes. Bathrooms and closets are the best thing that they were ever invented for wives and mothers, okay? Like I was saying earlier, it takes my kids 2 doors to get into my closet, my bedroom door and then my closet door. I feel extra safe. But I would just remember it, and again, not really knowing and not really having the language or the words, right? So it's kind of like a mantra. And I would just repeat it all day long. And when I would hit a bad moment or something, I would just repeat it. And that's one thing I've learned a lot, is a lot of these things are just like those micro habits, and you just got to keep doing them and keep doing them and keep doing them. But again, it was still super slow process. And I think it's because, again, going back to that filtered version is, well, I was starting to talk about it a little bit to friends and like maybe other coworkers, with kids and like husbands and just that life transition. We would joke about it, right? It was relatable, but we would joke about it. We weren't sharing like practical tips. I wasn't so vulnerable, which is something I really, really try to lean in now. Because like you were saying, the power of storytelling. We were quote unquote telling our stories, but not really. I wasn't like, hey, I lay in my closet and feel dead in the morning. Hey, I sit in the bathroom and read this mantra over and over and say it all day. We were just kind of joking, like, yeah, we kind of got our shit together. So now I can say out loud that, Jonathan and I are really trying, but no one was really sharing like the tips and the tricks. And it took a long time because I just didn't really know anybody, but I knew I was never going to let it go. And I knew it was the beginning of like chipping away at that ego. I knew I could never go back to that old self. One, I knew like, well, then my marriage would just be over, because him and I both came out of it with like really hard, I don't want to say, maybe we'll just use the word guidelines. Like, hey, here are the 2 things that like you cannot do because they trigger me here or whatever.
That's all
Yeah,
it is.
boundaries. Yes. Why is that word escaping me? Because now I live and die by boundaries. But at that point, like, no one had introduced us to boundaries because, again, it's just shit that no one talks about.
No.
So I guess I was doing it and not realizing it because I didn't have the language for it, because the word mantra or boundaries and things like that weren't coming up. But it was really just about leaning into the positivity and the grateful. And I did start with just keeping a grateful journal. But as with anything, and this is something else that I'm a huge advocate of now, is we weren't consistent, because one thing I found out that humans do is once you start to feel good, you stop doing the things that make you feel good, right? So I would say that this was like in 2018, and that's when I latched on to Heather's podcast on Mom is in Control. That was really the first time I had heard someone speaking the language and using the words of some of the things I had been doing. And I was like, oh, this is a thing? Like, my mind was blown. And I listened to that podcast for almost a year. And then I was so inspired, Sasha, I actually stopped listening to her podcast
Oh no.
because she was all about, like, take action and you have to create this life you want. And at this point, I had never given myself permission to, like, own my power again. So I stopped listening to it because I was like, well, I'll never take action. So why am I even listening to this podcast? Like, this is just my life. This is just how it's going to be. And I should.
I had no idea. Okay.
Isn't that crazy?
My mind is blown right now. So keep going.
So I was just like, look, I should be grateful, right? Like, I have healthy kids at this point. Now my daughter's doing a lot better. She's walking. We got her through therapy, and, like, she kind of just outgrew some of those developmental delays. So she's doing fine. My marriage is fine. We're learning how to communicate better every day. I got a great job. I'm making great money. So why do I still feel kind of depressed? And I don't like to use that word because I know people really suffer from depression. But there were some moments when I was laying on this closet floor that I was like, if this isn't what depression feels like, then I absolutely don't want to know what it is. And then the one thing I did is I just picked up the podcast again. I don't know what told me to do it. I just did it. And then I just, like, was having drinks with my husband one night on a Friday night, like, after work. And I said, you know what? I need just 15 minutes. And I ran upstairs, and it was like it wasn't even me. I just, like, shot off this amazing email. And Heather read it on her podcast. And I took that as a sign of, like, okay, you really got to get your shit together. And that kind of just set me on the journey of self-development. And then I got introduced to this whole community of women. And that's when I was like, this is where the power is. And I always joked about, like, not being a people person. And maybe there's still varying degrees of being a people person.
There is definitely varying degrees of being a people person.
I know you can relate to that. So, but I had never had a community of women that supported me like that.
Yes.
And that is when I really exploded. And that's when I really grew. And I mean, without that community of women, like, even just like you, just because you knew that we were in the same group, it was like this open community, like, no matter what, will help anybody do anything. Absolutely. And I was like, this is what I have to talk about. This is a podcast. Like, let me just be so vulnerable and so raw and just share the journey. Because, like you said, even if it wasn't the same exact story, there's some similar things in there. And I knew it would make people not feel alone. And, like, one person would relate to it. Like, maybe your marriage problems weren't the same, but something in there you could just learn from, like, okay, things got bad and we came out of it. And I was like, I just got to share this. Like, I like to talk, obviously. I'm a natural leader. Like, I would actually be doing a disservice to other women. And that's what I was mad about, is that no one was talking to me. So who am I to not talk, right?
That's exactly what inspired me to do my podcast too, because I felt like my whole life was, I feel like I was fed a bunch of bullshit. And I
Yes.
always had to find out the hard way for myself. And I feel that if I can make anybody's life just 1% easier or share what I've struggled with so that they don't have to make that exact same struggle, then I would be doing a disservice to humanity by not, and that may sound very worldly on another level, but that's truly how I feel, is if I don't share these things, I'm doing everyone else a disservice. And that doesn't sit well with me.
Exactly. Like, I had a great childhood, but we did grow up poor. And that was always my driver. And that, oh, I'm just gonna, go to college and get a job and I'm gonna make lots of money and I'm never gonna be poor again. And I thought that as a woman, that's how I was gonna like put my mark on the world. But that's not what I came to learn out of that is you have a different gift, and your gift is the ability to not be uncomfortable in situations that are uncomfortable and to be vulnerable and to be raw and authentic. Like, I love authentic people, and that's your gift. So lean into it and just tell the story and offer that. And that's how you change women and that, the lives of women. And that's how you empower women. It wasn't getting a job and making lots of money to show my daughter that women can do anything that men could do. It was helping other women realize that they're not alone and that it's hard to be a woman and that no one's talking about it. But we have so much fucking power, and there's not a day that I'd ever not want to be a woman because, I mean, we're fucking amazing.
Which is so funny because when I was younger, I would say that all the time, like, oh, men have it so easy. Like, I wish I was a man. And in the last decade, I have definitely like did a mindset shift. And I am like, we are the most powerful fucking beings on the planet. Like, this is like, we create life, literally.
I know. Like, for 9 months, I'm carrying another human in my body, and then my body knows how to push it out.
Exactly. Like, science can't even predict when your baby's going to be born because that is how amazing nature has intended it, to where like your body just intuitively knows. And going off of that, I do want to say that adding to your list of talents, I would say, and this just came up to me and I'm like, I have to tell her, you are actually a very intuitive person. I don't know if you know this or recognize this, but just listening to your story, you're like, oh, this thing came up. So I was just like, it wasn't even me. So I just like went and did it. Like, that is your inner guide, your inner being saying like, follow this breadcrumb. Like, I'm giving you signs, and you listened. And that in itself is beauty, because there's so many people out there, women particularly, that shut off that part of our brain. Society has conditioned us to shut off that part of our brain, to trust our gut, to second guess ourselves. And you, I would say, are a step ahead of a lot of people out there, because you're able to trust that intuition, that instinct, that, oh my gosh, I have to take 15 minutes and run upstairs and write this email, or I have to turn on this podcast, or I have to do this, or I have to reach out for help, or this isn't working. What else can I do? Like, that's a very intuitive skill. And so I thought I should tell you that.
Thank you. No, thank you. And like we were kind of talking earlier, and I was like, part of this journey for me is like when my husband had said, you need a hobby. And I was like, I don't know how to have a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so sad when I look back on that is, and I was listening to Oprah's Super Soul Sunday podcast, which I am obsessed with. And they were saying like, everyone has a purpose. And I was like, well, I don't. So, but it's things like that that I'm really trying to lean into now, like in the last 6 months, that I have suppressed for so long. Like, I would think I don't have a gift because I'm not good at the basic things that every day, like, oh, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not good at math, I'm not good at tangible things. But I never thought about being intuitive as being a gift, thank you, or a skill. But I always was like, I like to tell stories. I like to be authentic. I hate the idea of being fake. But I never thought about that as a skill. But
Yeah,
now,
we don't think of vulnerability as, they call it soft skills, kind of like communication. Like, while you're not actually creating something with your hands, it is still very much a skill to be able to communicate what it is you're thinking in a way that is received effectively by another party. And so that in itself is not something that is, I would say it's a gift. It's also a skill that can be learned and improved upon. Everybody can have some level of soft skills, but some people are just better at it than others. Like, some people can do a better cartwheel than me. Doesn't mean I'm,
yeah. And that I think is just an amazing part. Like you were saying about the breadcrumbs, like that's my big goal right now. And as I go through this journey about learning myself is trusting myself. And you were talking about, we were at that event alive in Detroit a couple of weeks ago, and I think I know my aha moment was, I don't actually trust myself. Like, these people were coming up to me that I've never met. Some of them I know, like, through community and stuff, but some of them were new to me, and they were like, oh, I just heard you on your podcast, and oh my God, I was so excited to meet you. And I was like cringing, because I was like, why are you excited to see me? Because I
Yeah.
just wasn't trusting myself that I actually can inspire people, and or just being yourself is inspiring to other people, because all people really want to do deep down is be themselves. It's all you know how to really do. And everything else outside of just being yourself is just not you. And it takes so much damn energy. And I started to realize, it's like, I don't trust myself, and I should lean into that more and more and more. So that comment is actually right on time, because that's something I've been journaling about since we've been back for the last couple of weeks, and is just trust yourself and listen to your body, because it knows what it needs, and try to practice that, because that's a skill that you have to develop. Because like you said, you've been told for so long to shut it off, don't have emotions, women are too emotional, shut it off, and you're like, what? That's what I am, is an emotional being. That's what feminine energy
That's
is.
what being a human is. That's what
That's
separates us
true.
from the next species, is that we're able to have reasoning skills and emotions and feel things on a deeper level, whatever that looks like. But that's what sets us apart.
Yes. And that's another thing that I was learning about, is not just about like men and women, but just like feminine energy versus
Yeah.
masculine energy, and how you have both, no matter what sex you are, and how you can like leverage both of them. So like, and I do believe this, like going back to my husband, like the things that he's really good at are not the things I'm really good at, but that's why we make such a fucking great team, is because we can help each other. And as long as we're communicating in that way, it's true. But that's also like, talking about emotions is like same with the guys. We don't let guys have emotions either.
That's one of the reasons I love my husband so much, though, is because I was a very emotionally detached person. Like when you first met, like if you would have met me 10 or 15 years ago, I was a bitch. I was a badass. I was a hard ass. Like you couldn't
Mhm.
make me cry. I would always walk up to the biggest guy in the bar and try and start a fight. Like I was rowdy. Like I was a hell raiser, right? And my husband is a very confident individual. He just kind of like lays it out there. He kind of wears his heart on his sleeve. Not saying that he's a crybaby, but like there was a couple things that happened in our very beginning stages of being together. And it was the first time that I have ever seen a man just like openly cry and be upset about something. And like, and I can't even believe I'm like talking about this, because I don't think I've ever said this out loud. But like looking at him in that moment, I was like, I was jealous that he
Mhm.
just felt so comfortable to like with himself to be able to like let out his emotions, because me, I would shove it so far down, and I just knew that he had that ability and I wanted that someday, right? So we see things in other people that we want, and so right then and there I'm like, I would love for someday just to feel the things I feel and not give a shit about what anybody else thinks. And he does that to this day.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've really learned about my husband and myself, like going through that, is all the things that I thought you know, would make me nuts and drive me crazy. It's because I envied it, because I couldn't do it.
Yep.
And like he would tell me things, and I'm like, oh my God, and I'm learning so much. And like, I know we were joking about this earlier. It's like so many times like feel myself, and most of the time I just do it on the podcast, because he helps me edit my podcast intros and stuff, so I know he'll hear it. I'll just give him credit on the podcast. I'm like, yeah, I'm learning this new thing that my husband's been really good at for a long time, but I just wouldn't let myself, feel it. And like, you're joking about him being physical touch, but it was really just about, he has this kind of sensitive nature, where I was more like you in that, like, don't touch me. I don't want to be touched. I want to be left alone, because if you touch me, now all of a sudden I have to fucking be emotional too. And I don't want to be, because that's too vulnerable. And I
Yep.
tried to suppress it for so many years, like with that outward confidence, that mask that I would put on when I would go out in the world. And here you are trying to break it down, and I don't like it. So it's
I mean,
definitely, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, it's just so funny because we are so similar in that sense. Because that was me and my husband. I was definitely like, I'm wearing the pants in this relationship, and he's like, Sasha, like, quit being a jerk. Like, it's okay.
Yes. And that's where I say like everything I did was from like this ego driven place. Like my ego was so much louder than anything else, than my true self. Cause I was the same way. I was like, I don't want to have kids because I want to have this amazing career and I want to be this powerful woman and I want to like take the world by storm and blah, blah, blah. And I
Yep.
don't even know where I got that shit from.
I don't either. I don't know if that like there's something in our lineage where we were suppressed and now all of a sudden we've like breaking free of the chains and we're like, I'm here to fuck shit up.
I want to break stuff.
So, okay, so let's take a step back. So you're on this personal development journey. You had this aha moment at Alive, which I think is incredible. It's so simple, but like be yourself. Like how much do we show up as our true selves and how often do we really like filter the things that we say, the things that we do, or maybe dim our light because we don't want to like outshine the next person, or I want this much, but not enough. So you've kind of come to that realization. What's next for you?
Well, I don't really know. And I would say that I'm comfortable not knowing. But through running my podcast, I think I've learned just so much about myself because, well, I launched it because I knew I had a story to share and I wanted to empower women. Then I went through this huge vulnerability hangover once I launched it because you're literally sharing your innermost secrets that no one talks about it.
It's hard.
And you're like, oh, this is why no one talks about it because it's kind of weird to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I've really learned just so much about myself through this journey. And I think the next thing I'm going to do is a lot of people have been reaching out to me about wanting to start their own podcast. So right now I'm going to just stand up a program to just kind of give people the guidance on like how I did it
I love
and
that.
help them do that. So I'm going to be putting that up on my website here in a couple weeks. It's not up yet. I'm still working through the details, but I would say that's one of the biggest things that a lot of people are asking me right now. I would say the two biggest things that come out of my podcast for me, and which going back to like following the breadcrumbs, like what's in front of you, is how do I start a podcast and how do I find my passion? Well, since I'm still finding my passion, we're going to start with how to start a podcast because I know how to do that.
I love that. And when you get those links, I'll add them to the show notes. So going back to the podcast, I have a few more questions for you before we kind of start to wrap things up here. So
Yeah.
in terms of like starting the podcast, what do you think the most challenging part was?
Oh, I think the most challenging part was, and I think anybody, including yourself, would agree with this, is what the fuck do I call it?
I
Like
have no
I
idea
have
what you're talking about. I've only changed my podcast name 3 times in 3 years.
is just you're like, I know what I want the content to be about. I know who I want to talk to, but like, damn, what do I call it? And it's so hard because you literally rack your brain and you're like, but there's no new name you can come up with, right? And you just go through it and you go through it. But the funny story, like how I came up with Just Realized, is my husband and I were just kind of texting back and forth about the podcast, about what it would be like, and just about life in general. And we kept saying back and forth, well, I just realized this, or I just realized podcasting is just audio journaling, or I just realized this, or I just realized that. And he texted me and he was like, that's it. You just realized it's just your story and all the things you just realized, and leaning into the words just realized as your aha moments. And I think aha moments are the keys. Like those are the moments where your brain is rewired for change, is when you're like, oh shit, I never thought about it like that. And I felt like at the crux of everything, that's what my story was about, was empowering women through those moments that they didn't realize. Like they didn't realize weren't giving themselves permission to take care of themselves, or they didn't realize they were giving their power away, or they didn't realize how much power they actually held within them. So that's how I came up with the name. I don't know if it's going to change. I'm only 3 months in, or maybe 4 now, but
It seems like way longer than that. I
I
feel
know.
like you've always had a podcast now.
I feel like that too, but let's say I launched November 11th on 11/11. So I don't, how many months is that? 3, 4, going into 4 in March, I guess.
Sure,
But
let's call it 4.
that's one thing that I do want to trust in, like your story, is it's okay to not know, but start. just start and just do it. If it's on your heart, that's how you find it. And your passions change and you change. And that's the only thing you can count on is change. So just do it.
Absolutely. Like how you show up in the world and what you're doing today could be very, very different than what you do 5 or 10 years from now. And knowing that, like, that's okay. Like, nobody cares. And I know we had talked about this before too, is is it going to matter in 5 years? And if not, don't spend more than 5 minutes thinking about this. And I have to tell myself this every day. And I feel like you also embody that. Like, who cares? Like, in the grand scheme of things, who freaking cares? It is just a name. So another question that comes up though, because I know a couple of episodes of my own podcast that were really, really hard for me to do, you know, talking about that vulnerability. What was the hardest podcast that you've done so far? What was the hardest one to record?
Oh, I don't know if there's one particular one that was hard for me. It was just those first 3 weeks of launching and everyone coming up to me, and I would say mostly at work. It surprised me how many people at work listened, and people that I didn't even think would listen, or people that maybe I didn't even really talk to that much before I launched the podcast. And or even some of my really good friends would say things to me like, God, I didn't know you were so depressed that you were laying in your closet. And I was like, yeah, but now my closet's amazing. And that's where I record my podcast. So it's okay. It was just
full circle.
Yes, it's completely full circle. I got all my woo-woo stuff, all my books, my microphone, everything in here. But I can't think of just one podcast, but it was literally those first 3 weeks or those first month. I literally thought I hated podcasting. I was like, why did I do this? Why did I commit to this? This is so stupid. I hate it. What am I doing? Oh my God. And then somebody was like, you're having a vulnerability hangover. They were like, you need to listen to Brene Brown's TED Talks. And I just had like this eye-opening experience. I was still feeling the feeling. It took a little bit longer to work through it.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I got through it, I was like, oh, this is awesome. And now I'm in a place where I really try not to edit things out unless something like really crazy happens. Like my daughter walks in screaming because she stubbed her toe. I just try to keep it like completely 100. And we talked about this earlier, is like, I don't want to filter myself and I don't want to not cuss, because I want you to like me for me and be attracted to me. And I don't want to say it the way that you want to hear it. I want to say it the way that I'm going to say it. And if it resonates with you, it resonates with you. And if you don't like it, then there's someone else that will help you and inspire you in a different way.
Absolutely. And I love and appreciate that, because I want, when people listen to my podcast or listen to your podcast or any podcast, right? I feel like if you were to have a conversation with that person, they would talk to you the same way in person on a one-on-one conversation than they do show up in their podcast. Right. And I still get kind of triggered. Like, I'll listen to certain people's podcasts and I'm like, you're censoring yourself right now. Like, you're full of shit. Like, I'm over here like yelling from the back, but then I'm like, whatever, like, that's them. That's what they want to do. And I don't know. I really enjoy that you're out there just kind of keeping it real. I think that's why I click with you so much, is because you're just, and it's hard to be that real. Like, sometimes you're like, should I say this? Should I not say this? And you're like, oh, fuck it. I'm just going to say it.
I still have moments, like even in my real life, not even just the podcast. Like this week, I kind of had a little bit of a rough week, and I was just like saying stuff to people at work, and then I'd be driving home and I'm like, God damn it. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But it's just who I am, and take it or leave it. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to lean into it as a gift, because not enough people tell you how they really feel. And that's where, as society, we create this fucking fake life where 9 out of 10 people are probably miserable because they're doing something that someone else wants them to do and not what they want to do. And once I began to like find myself, I was like, never again. And I think this was your aha moment at Alive, is like, I'm gonna start saying no. And I don't say it enough.
I'm going to say a lot more no's this year. So anybody listening to this, the answer is no.
I know. And I know I've told this story, but when Sasha stood up at the event and she was like, so my big aha is I'm saying no. And I was saying to myself, I was like, well, she already said yes to me, so she cannot go back.
But I like you and I like podcasting. So of course I had to say yes. And what I mean by, like, when I say no, I'm going to say no to things that don't feel good in my gut. So, if somebody comes up to you and they're like, hey, would you want to do this? And if it doesn't immediately excite you, the answer should be no.
Exactly.
And so that's kind of how I'm doing it. Like, it's all about a feeling. Like, if it feels good, if it makes me feel excited, then hell yeah, I'm going to say yeah to it. if it makes me feel like constricted and like, oh, I don't think I really want to do this, then I'm going to say no. And as hard as it is for me to say no, I'm going to start putting my foot down a lot more and setting those boundaries. So
yes, I think it's a great place to be. And that's by doing that, that's how you really start to figure out who you are. At least for me, that's what's really worked.
yeah, boundaries just kind of make you stop and realize what you are prioritizing in your life too. Like, you make time for what's important, and if you aren't in that, then you're not putting yourself like in your calendar as a priority, right? And if you're not filling your own cup, then you can't really pour into others. And so sometimes you have to do that harsh no to make more time and space for you, for your family, and for the things that bring you joy and are going to energize you to keep on going.
Yes, I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned over the last 6 or 7 months, for sure.
I love it. So what do you want to leave listeners with?
I want to leave people with, don't be scared to take your power back. And every time you find yourself in a situation, like you were just saying, that just doesn't feel good and feels completely out of alignment with you, just remind yourself to not give them your power. And anytime you feel yourself getting upset, just say, okay, I'm not going to let this person have my power today because it's my power and I'm going to keep it. And to just really lean into that and just focus on that and just watch how life unfolds for you and just practice that for a couple months and see where you go.
Oh, yes, it can be very, very powerful. All right. And then one last thing before I let you go, can you real quick share what your podcast is, your Instagram handle, how people can connect with you, and if you have anything coming up that maybe they could be a part of?
Yeah. So the podcast is Just Realized. It's on Apple and Spotify and Stitcher and all the places. I'm on Instagram at Katie Just Realized. I also have a private Facebook group, the Just Realized community. And in there, I just try to share things that are going on in my life to get a little bit more personal with that group, like my weekly planning sessions, like you were saying, like where you make sure you make time for yourself. But the big thing I'm leaning into in there is our Fuck Yes Fridays, is taking out Fridays to celebrate yourself. And those Fuck Yes moments that you've had during the week, that make sure you're paying attention to those and accounting for those. Like, even like I said, this week I had a rough week, but I was like, okay, if I sit back and reflect, what awesome things happened this week, and focus on those and start shifting our mindsets to celebrate ourselves instead of just beat ourselves up. So right now, that's one of the biggest things I'm leaning into. And then you can also check out the podcast on my website, justrealizedpodcast.com. And hopefully soon, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be launching my How to Start a Podcast program on there.
Yay! Okay, so I will grab all those links from you so you guys can just head to the show notes. Make sure to follow Katie on all platforms. Listen to her podcast. Leave her a review. You guys are going to love her. And Katie, I just want to say again, thank you so much for coming on here and being vulnerable and sharing your story. I know sometimes it's really hard, but I am sure that people resonated with you and that you have impacted at least one person in some way, shape, or form. And in hopes, we just do this to hope that the next person will be inspired for change in their own life. So just thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you so much for everything and for helping me get started.
Yay! All right.